Hey, Junior! Got something special for you. Tank did it. Chrome's every damn thing.
Don't try again.
Welcome to Hamburgers and Horror, the home of meat, monsters, and murderous cannibals hoping to chop you up. I'm Noah Hook, and today we're looking at Leatherface, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre Part 3. This 1990 American slasher film follows a young yuppie couple who are traveling through Texas when they witness a shooting at a rural gas station. They flee down a supposed shortcut that leads them to Leatherface and his new murderous family members. While on the run, they meet a local survivalist who may be their only shot at getting out alive. After the continuing success of the Nightmare franchise, New Line Cinema bought the rights to the Texas Chainsaw Massacre from the Cannon Group with the intention of turning it into a more frequent series. New Line CEO Bob Shea hoped to move on from the comedic tone of TCM2 and bring the series back to its gritty roots. He also hoped to focus the film more on Leatherface than his family members, with the hopes of turning him into an icon on the level of Michael, Jason, and Freddy. The company fast-tracked a teaser trailer before a writer or director were even hired, but they eventually brought on novelist and screenwriter David Shaw of films like Nightmare 5, Critters 3, and The Hills Run Red. Tom Savini and Peter Jackson were considered to direct, but the role ultimately went to Jeff Burr. He's directed a bunch of horror sequels as well, including Stepfather 2, Pumpkinhead 2, and Puppet Masters 4 and 5. This time around, the victims are played by Kate Hodge from The Hidden 2 as Michelle, William Butler from Friday Part 7 as Ryan, Ken Foray from Dawn of the Dead as Benny, and Tony Hudson from Just One of the Guys as Sarah. The Sawyers have a lot of new faces this time around, including R.A. Mihailoff from Trancers 3 as Leatherface, Viggo fucking Mortensen from the Lord of the Rings trilogy as Tex Sawyer, Joseph Unger from A Nightmare on Elm Street as Tink Sawyer, and Kane Hodder also worked as Leatherface's stuntman for some scenes as well. This film marks the beginning of this franchise having very little continuity from film to film, so aside from Leatherface, you can usually expect it to be a rotating cast of other villainous Sawyer family members. Most people consider this to be in the same timeline as the first, which doesn't make much sense given Leatherface should definitely be dead, but you could also view it as a reboot or really anything in between. There are no rules. Cinematography was handled by James Carter of films like Deadly Weapon and My Dog Skip, and the score was composed by James Manzi of Night of the Demons 2. Burr originally wanted to shoot the film on 16mm in Texas, but many of his creative aspirations were crushed by producers. They already began building sets in California when he was hired, and they had a lot more say in what this story could and would be than he did. Burr was even fired at one point in the middle of production for going over budget, but they ultimately hired him back because they realized nobody else was going to take this half-done, thankless job. On top of all that, fucking wildfires burned down several of their sets and a bunch of crew members quit halfway through. It sounds like it was an all-around miserable experience, and things didn't get any easier once production wrapped because the MPAA was going to give the film an X rating until 4 minutes of the film were ultimately cut out. It was mostly the violent stuff, so many of these kills clearly get cut away from very quickly. TCM3 ultimately grossed $6 million at the box office, tripling its $2 million budget, but it was still considered a failure compared to the first two films. It was also a failure amongst critics who found it generic and obviously a film that was created around a bunch of kills as its centerpieces, only for those kills to be edited out. It currently has a 13 and 30% on Rotten Tomatoes, along with a 2.3 on Letterboxd, which is horrifyingly somehow in the middle of the pack for this godforsaken franchise. I'm not a big fan of part 3. I think it lacks the earnest charm, invention, depravity, and humor that Hooper brought to the franchise with the first two. This is a film created by a desperate studio who are hoping to come up with a new horror icon, and you can feel that throughout most of the runtime. But it does have a pretty great cast who are doing their best with what they are given, and even a mediocre TCM film is pretty fun in my eyes. So with all that said, it's probably time we get started. Go grab your automated sledgehammers, y'all, because we're watching the Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3. The movie opens with a classic text crawl that reminds us of previous events, with a few notable updates. Apparently Sally Hardesty died in a hospital back in '77, and a man named W.E. Sawyer was the only one who lived to see trial. It was believed this man was in fact Leatherface, and he was executed in a gas chamber in 1981. But if the jury was mistaken, then Leatherface is still out there. This intro makes very little sense. Is W.E. supposed to be the cook? Are we just ignoring the second film entirely? It really has no effect on the plot, so let's just move on so this lady can get her head bashed in. Thank you, ma'am. Leatherface does what he's best at and makes a shiny new mask out of the woman's face. The victim's sister Sarah watches in horror from outside, and an accidental twig snap sends Leather on the hunt for her. We'll catch up with her later though. Now we meet the film's very bland protagonists, Michelle and Ryan, a couple whose relationship is on its last leg. Michelle is about to head off to Europe to study abroad, which will effectively break them up, and Ryan is too busy being pissy to enjoy this final road trip with her. They catch word of a mass grave that's recently been found, which they'll obviously come across soon. The two have a brief debate over the death penalty, with Michelle arguing against all forms of violence. Stretch makes a very brief appearance as a news anchor, good for her, and the unhappy couple makes it to the crime scene that night. A forensic crew is plucking a bunch of ooey gooey body parts out of a big ol' pit, and it sounds like this isn't the first mass grave they've uncovered. They estimate that 60 to 70 bodies have been buried here, damn. Ooh, Michael Seamus Wiles pops in as a checkpoint officer who warns the kids to keep moving through Texas as fast as they can. Their drive is relatively peaceful until they hit an armadillo, and Michelle can't bring herself to put the poor creature out of its misery. They stop at the last gas station for miles, where creepy attendant Alfredo pulls a hitchhiker and tries to get Michelle to buy an unwanted photo. He fills the tank while whispering a slew of sexual innuendos and threats her way while Ryan is on the can, but a friendly local named Tex steps in to defend the lady's honor. But he's also way too into the armadillo blood on their hood.
You're the last thing I saw before I died. I die a happy man.
Ryan is immediately sussed out by the cowboy asking for a ride, and he turns Tex down even though he shows them a shortcut to Houston on the map. Creepy-ass Alfredo peeps on Michelle in the ladies' room, but Tex catches him and tosses him out of his own store. The angry Pasta grabs his shotgun as the lovebirds hurry away, blasting out their rear windshield before supposedly dusting Tex as well. The dummies take the so-called shortcut, and as night falls, a skin-covered pickup goes chasing after them. Alfredo is fucking pumped. The souped-up beast quickly catches up and yeets a dead coyote onto their windshield, but keeps on driving as the kids stop. They start replacing a blown tire, but they hear an ominous squeaking sound getting closer. What's up, Leatherface? The big boy carves up their trunk before he gets knocked on his ass by the reversing vehicle, but we'll be seeing Bubba soon. An injured-looking Tex pops out and causes the lovebirds, as well as a new character named Benny, to crash their cars. This is actually good news for Ryan and Michelle because Benny is a badass survivalist. Ryan tries to warn him about the chainsaw-wielding maniac, but Benny chalks it up to shock from the crash. He also gives the kids some mysterious pills to make them feel better. Don't worry, he's not a bad guy, but the pills do make them a little bit loopy. They show Benny what's left of their car to convince him that they are being hunted, and Michelle asks Benny to go find Tex and help him. But unfortunately, Benny runs into a brand new Sawyer. Everybody, I'd love for you to meet Tinker. He's big into technology, even giving himself a DIY torch for an arm. Tink supposedly wants to help flip Benny's Jeep over so they can get out of there, but when he notices a chainsaw in the back of the truck, he asks him to wait a moment while he gets something. Ah, it's a machine gun. Tink gets antsy while Benny is loading up, so he rams the Jeep and sends him roly-polying down a big-ass hill. Leatherface joins him for a big boy rumble, and the two wrestle around until Bubba whips out a circular bone saw for close combat. Leatherface is about to finish him before Sarah returns to distract him away. Ooh, maybe we've got a new final girl on our hands. She circles back to Benny, revealing some stigmata and that she and her sisters were held captive by these freaks for a week. She's the only survivor, and she's gone a bit batty due to the things that she's experienced. Meanwhile, our so-called protagonists wake up from their painkiller nap and scurry off. Dumbass Michelle starts yelling out for Benny, so he leaves Sarah to find them. She immediately gets found by Leatherface though, and is carved up off screen. So much for our new final girl. Next, Leatherface finds the lovebirds, and poor fucking Ryan gets stuck in a coyote trap. Michelle reluctantly leaves him behind, and Bubba carves him up off screen. She finds a house and somehow thinks the people inside will help her. She finds a little girl, that's a change of pace for the series. Oh wait, she stabs her, so some things never change.
Yakety yak, don't talk back.
This little monster, as well as our favorite cowboy Tex, are also part of the Sawyer family. The same goes for Alfredo, who is dumping body parts in a nearby bog. I'm not sure what the point of Tex and Alfredo's little charade was. I guess it was just to get them to take the shortcut to their part of the woods. Benny comes across Alfredo kissing a severed head, which is enough to know he's not on the up and up. He sneaks up on the pasta man and presses him for intel, but ultimately gets none and knocks the redneck into the bog.
One down.
Tex nails Michelle to a chair so she can stay for dinner, also explaining that her blood is necessary to feed Grandpa. Some things really never change. Grandpa is just a corpse now though, so don't get too excited. Another new family member emerges, this one being Mama Sawyer. She uses a wheelchair and a voice box, but she's just as cruel as her children.
You best shuttle up or I'll do your tongue first.
Tink drags in Ryan and they hook him up by his ankles in a deer processing station, and somehow the poor bastard isn't dead yet. The brothers discuss a present they've got in Leatherface, who they refer to as Junior, and we get to see a softer side to them as they calmly handle a misunderstanding and apologize to each other. It ain't much, but it's at least better than the way the cook and Nubbins talk to each other. Junior arrives home and the boys unveil his present, a big ass golden chainsaw with the family saying carved into the side. It's a thing of beauty, I do say. Tink does scold Junior for letting Benny escape and tosses his headphones into the oven, but Leatherface don't take kindly to that and forces him to take it out with his good hand. Okay, looks like they haven't evolved that much more than the previous batch of Sawyers after all. Mama sends Junior to do his lessons, which is some kind of toy for young kids to learn words. Poor Leatherface can only recognize things as food though. Benny finds the Sawyer home and watches from a distance, but he's not prepared for what's next. The boys promise the little girl that the next kill using their new automated hammer was hers, so she gets to be the one to smash open Ryan's head. They decide they want to keep Michelle for a little while and threaten to let Junior have his way with her. So yeah, it would seem the little girl is Leatherface's child, who was probably given birth to by a rape victim. Guys, I don't think we had to go this far with a depravity, you know? Mama brags about how she cut her own private parts out. I'm sorry, what the fuck are we even doing here now? Oh, never mind, I guess. Leatherface decides he wants to slice her head open right now, but Benny opens fire into the kitchen with his machine gun. Mama takes a bunch of shots to the chest, Tink loses some fingers and an ear, and Michelle uses the opportunity to rip through the nails and free herself. She manages to shank Tex and make it outside to Benny. Lil Girl turns on the finale floodlights as Leatherface nearly runs over Benny, and Kate Hodge gets a little bit carried away with her line delivery.
Okay, alright. You and me then, huh? You sick fucker!
Mama succumbs to her wounds, and it seems Tink isn't far behind, and his final words are commanding his brother to bring home the meat. Junior chases Michelle through the woods, and Tex takes on Benny in the yard. The boys trade some solid blows to each other, but Benny ultimately douses the killer in gasoline and sets him ablaze. Bet on the wrong horse, huh, you little brat? A trap yanks Michelle into the body bog and allows Leatherface to catch up, but Benny somehow catches up as well and tackles the big lug. They wrestle around in the water as the big-ass chainsaw whirs with anger, and Leatherface pushes Benny into it. He grabs a hold of Michelle on the shoreline, but she's finally come full circle and has what it takes to bash this giant armadillo of a man in the face with a rock a bunch of times. This seems to kill Leather as he sinks below the surface, and just like that, it's morning. Michelle is making her way back to civilization as Alfredo's truck pulls up, but it's just good old Benny. He was supposed to die, but test audiences liked his character so much that they let him live. But nasty little Alfredo hitched a ride with Benny and conks him out, but Michelle grabs a shotgun and blows his ass away. They dump his body like a piece of roadkill, and they head off for greener pastures as Leatherface watches to end the movie. And that's TCM 3. Ugh, I wish I could lie to y'all and say I really enjoy this one, but it just isn't true. For me, part 3 is a pretty big drop in quality from the previous 2 films in pretty much every way. The protagonists are pretty bland and unlikable. Michelle has some surface level character growth between the armadillo and being able to smash Leatherface, but it's just a carbon copy of the themes from something like The Hills Have Eyes. Ken Foray comes through and helps with this a bit, cause who doesn't love Ken Foray? But even Benny is around to move the plot forward primarily as opposed to adding a lot of personality to the film. I would say that the movie's villains are its strong point though. I don't get quite as much from Alfredo, Mama, and the little girl. Alfredo is kind of just a general vulgar redneck, and the ladies simply don't get enough screen time to really stand out. I don't hate this version of Leatherface, but it's definitely a very different interpretation compared to what we've seen before. I love Leatherface most when he's a scared, confused, abused guard dog that his family coaxes into committing horrible acts. That to me is way more interesting than turning him into another Jason or Michael. The whole point of this film was to transform him into a generic slasher killer, and that subsequently turns this previously indie kind of art house franchise into a studio-run, run-of-the-mill slasher. This is the film that really sets the precedent for Leatherface being a big, dumb, angry monster that kills people for fun. And that's okay, it's certainly what has kept this franchise around for so long, but even amongst the more gritty, angry Leatherfaces, I'm not sure this is the best version of that either. But part 3 does have some strong points as well. You obviously have some very talented people here. Getting to see Viggo Mortensen a decade before The Lord of the Rings playing this crazy hillbilly is super fun. Generally, I think the cinematography is a bit of a downgrade, but there are some really nice shots utilizing the desert landscape and the boggy swamps. This one is obviously more self-serious than part 2, but there is a nice undercurrent of dark humor happening throughout the film. And Leatherface also looks solid here. He's got a gritty, really gross mask to match his amped up anger. Michelle starts off pretty bland, but by the finale she is ripping her hands out of the chair she's nailed to, puts up a great fight against Leatherface, and she's the one to finish off Alfredo. She puts up more of a fight, and for much longer than Stretch or Sally, she's definitely one of the toughest final girls we get through the whole franchise. But at the end of the day, I do think part 3 is probably the most forgettable one in the entire franchise. It's outclassed and outcrafted by the best films here, but there are also films that come later that are more memorable because they are so much worse. Part 3 does try to up the depravity, but we'll soon check out films that push the envelope into even more fucked up territory. All of this leaves part 3 without its own really distinct vision or voice. It does have some solid kills, a fun soundtrack, and some quirky characters. It really doesn't do anything bad enough for me to hate it or want to shit on it. It's just run of the mill, it's just standard. I mean, it's okay for a part 3 in a long horror franchise, but when you compare it to Friday Part 3, The Dream Warriors, or Season of the Witch, it really starts to feel less special in that way. It's probably more in line with things like Hellraiser 3 or Child's Play 3, which were also both in the early 90s. I think there was just a big issue of either making new and compelling horror, as well as getting funding and great talent behind the sequels for franchises that were still in the early stages then as well. TCM 3 feels like a generic commercial attempt at something that needs a specific vision from a writer or director. It's the kind of pointless sequel Hooper went so far out of his way to avoid making. He made the best version first, and he knew what could become of his creation once slasher started to boom in the 80s, so he came back and made a parody of it with Part 2. Part 3 is the exact kind of low-budget, uninspired knockoff that Part 2 was mocking. Well, that's about it. What do y'all think of TCM 3? Do you like it more than I do? Was it a bit too hard on it? Let me know down below. Soon we'll be checking out the absolute masterpiece that is TCM 4, The Next Generation, but first I've got to check out a patron request. Be sure to join me in 2 weeks as we actually go back to Tobe Hooper's work to watch Life Force. It's a really funky sci-fi horror. If you haven't seen it, go check it out. Thank you all so much for joining me, and an extra thank you to my patrons. As always, I'm Noah Hook, and thanks for watching Hamburgers and Horror. Stay safe out there. Thanks for watching my review of TCM 3. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like and subscribe so you can keep up with all my horror reviews, and if you want to help support the channel further, you should check out my Patreon account. You'll be able to vote for future movies and franchises I cover on the channel. Thanks y'all.